evening. I want to thank you all for coming here. We've had a great week of conversation with a number of people. I want to thank a few people before we begin, and then we're going to start talking this evening with folks up here about some important and interesting issues. First of all, I'd like to thank all of our participants. Those of you who do not have one, you should have one. Pick one of these up somewhere along the line. We spent a week in our USC conference on sports, gender in sports. This has been our second annual USC conference on sports. You may remember last year's on the Olympics. We may be holding two next year. We're working on that one. These things are getting so popular. But in any case, this is our conference on gender in sports, and we've had a number of literally the top scholars in the world on gender issues in sports have been speaking all week about a whole variety of issues. And I'm going to just briefly run down the list here because the presentations were so good and the names here are so impressive. I want to thank each one of them individually. Don Heinel is the Senior Associate Athletic Director here at USC. Spoke the first day. Michaela Musto. Boy, I'm just going to mispronounce names all night. Jan de Kamp, and I'll come back to him. Michelle Donnelly, Mary Jo Kane, Mike Messner, Cheryl Cookie, Andrew Billings, Annie Spahun, Shari Dworkin, and Rook Campbell and Don Sabo are just a list of people who are at the very front of the discussion of gender in sports. We literally got the best people in the world, both in the United States and Europe, to come in and talk. So it's been a great week of conference discussion, a great week of research discussion, and we want to thank everyone who's participated in it. Anybody who I've missed your name, my apologies. That's my fault, not yours. I apologize for missing your name if I did. I'd also like to thank Dean Ernest Wilson for supporting our work here. He couldn't be here this evening, but he sends his best and has been very supportive of this conference. Also, I want to thank the University of Paris-Sorbonne Nouveau, which I mispronounced again, and Jan de Kamp, whose name I'm going to mispronounce again, but he's gotten used to it. Jan, where are you? There we go. Okay, there we go. This is Jan de Kamp. He is leading up a lot of study on sports in France and has been developing programs, and we've got a partnership with the University of Paris-Sorbonne Nouveau and are expanding that relationship out to some other universities throughout Europe to internationalize this discussion. And so I want to thank Jan in particular and the University of Paris-Sorbonne Nouveau for being a part of this program. Also, I would be remiss if I didn't thank John Hackett. Is John around? John's the tall guy, and I mean the really tall guy. Anything that goes right with the USC Annenberg Institute of Sports Media and Society goes right because of John. Oh, there he is. Anything that goes wrong typically goes wrong because of me. So anything that works, you can thank John for. I'd also like to thank all of our development staff, our event staff, and Jim Yoder and his staff back doing the sound and the video of this. They're a great lot of help, and none of this could happen without them. This evening, the title of our program is Title IX to 2013, Perspectives on Gender in Sports in the New Millennium, and this is a new millennium. We have three very interesting and engaging people up here, and I want to introduce them first, and then we'll start talking about some of these issues. First of all, on my far left, I want to introduce Dr. Donna Lopiano. Dr. Lopiano is the president and founder of Sports Management Resources, and was once the chief executive officer of the Women's Sports Foundation, I should say, from 1992 to 2007. A 9-time All-American athlete and participant in 26 national championships in 4 sports. How do you do that? I couldn't make it to one national championship in one sport. I couldn't even make it on a sport. Well, one sport. But in any case, Dr. Lopiano was also a pioneer in the fight for gender equity in sports, and she was recently named one of the 10 most powerful women in sports by Fox Sports, and the Sporting News has also listed her as one of the 100 most influential people in all of sports history, contemporary sports history. So I'd like to have you welcome Dr. Lopiano. And just to move down the line, Rook Campbell is a former professional cyclist specializing in distance cycling on the European circuit, so she's going to be able to talk to us a little bit about some contemporary professional sports from a female perspective. She has now moved her interest in professional competition into a scholarly career, teaching classes in global politics, teaching classes and doing research, I should say, in global politics, public diplomacy, and sports. So if you could welcome Rook Campbell. And finally, Lindsay Rhodes, who's right over here, has really an extensive career in sports broadcasting. She's worked as an anchor at NFL Total Access and as a reporter for the NFL Network Now, and a field and in-studio reporter for NFL Game Day Morning. But beyond the NFL Network, she's reported for sports for Fox Sports Net West and for NBC, in particular serving as sports desk reporter for NBC Sports coverage of the 2008 Summer Olympics. So if you could please welcome Lindsay Rhodes. So now, I think all of us up here have a USC tie at one point or another. So, but Lindsay, yes, did go to USC. As in
worth pointing out, for sure.
Always worth pointing out. And speaking of people who went to USC, I have to send a couple of regards. One, Jeannie Buss wanted to be here, and for reasons which are all too obvious, was unable to make it, but she sent her best. She also wanted to note that she thinks this is a very important discussion and one that should be extended. So she wanted to send that along. Also, one of the pioneers in broadcasting as a woman sports broadcaster, Jane Kennedy, had to bow out due to physical ailments, and she also wanted to note that she really would have liked to have been here and involved in the discussion. I want to start our talk this evening with Donna. As I mentioned, Donna is not only one of the most powerful people in sports historically, but really a legend in the discussion of sports and gender issues in sports. Now, as the story goes, on June 23rd of 1972, the U.S. Congress passed Title IX, a law ensuring equal opportunity in sports for women, and forever after, equity reigned. We're here tonight to challenge that story, or at least move past some of the simplistic narrative in order to look a bit more closely at what has happened since 1972 and what is happening in particular right now in 2013. And we're going to look at this from a variety of perspectives, and I want to begin with Donna Lopiano, who has a PowerPoint up here to discuss a little bit about what has happened since Title IX. And I'd like to invite Donna, first of all, to talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Dan. And I really asked Dan for the opportunity to kind of set the scene for everyone, to give you the most recent statistics on participation and some of the measures we look at when we answer the question, have they achieved equity yet in interscholastic and intercollegiate sport? Now, I'm going to just run through 10 quick slides, so it'll take me 5 minutes. Don't try to take notes if you're here for a required class. I will give this PowerPoint to Dan. He can post it somewhere and you can access it. So if you can just try to take a deep breath and get a feel for where we are with this, let's see how this goes. Let's do high school participation first. And you're looking at participation numbers from 1972 to, am I doing that? No, you're doing it. Stop it. From 1972 to 2012. And as you can see, there's been a tremendous amount of participation growth in women's sports. But women's sports, let me see if I can get my laser here. This is the current number of female high school participants. In 2012, we still haven't gotten to the point of men's sport participation in 1972. This is proof that this is not a zero-sum game. When Title IX first passed, the headlines across the country were Title IX and women's sports would be the death of big-time football. That somehow, if women were given the opportunity to play, men would lose. And what you should see from all these numbers is that men's sport participation at the high school and the college level has continued to grow. This is not a zero-sum game. There are 49% of all the students in high school are females. Only 42% of all high school athletes are female. What is a little depressing is when you look over the last 7 years, sports participation opportunities for boys are growing at a faster rate than sports participation for girls, even though girls are underrepresented. So when you look at the last 7 years in these underlying numbers, these are the years in which boys' sport participation exceeded girls' sport participation in terms of new participation opportunities. So over the last 7 years, boys' sport has grown 77,000 more new participation opportunities than girls. And it's a depressing trend, and this shows you why. Instead of this participation gap closing, it has leveled off. Girls' sports participation has leveled off, and the gap is actually getting larger now, to the point where girls at the high school level are short 1.3 million participation opportunities. And the same is true at the college level. It's almost a mirror image of what's happening at the high school level. You can see that there are not many participation opportunities at the college level. There are over 7 million kids participating in high school sports. They are vying for about 261 plus 198, 450,000 NCAA sport participation slots. There's another 140,000 in National Junior College Athletic Association, NAIA, the other non-NCAA governed sports. But you have 7 million kids trying for about 450,000 slots. College sport participation programs do not meet the needs of either men's or women's sports in terms of numbers of opportunities available. But at the college level, when you look at total student body, 57% of all college students are female. 57%. They only get 43% of all participation opportunities. And like at the high school level, when you look over the last 8 years, in 6 of the past 8 years, new sports opportunities for college men have increased at a rate faster than new sports opportunities for college women. And again, the same thing is happening. You're seeing a widening of the gap instead of a narrowing of the gap. A lot of people say that somehow, all right, so we know men's participation opportunities have not declined. Have men's sports teams dropped? Because you read about this in the newspapers, right? The wrestling team has been dropped by a school. The men's swimming team has been dropped by a school. Sports get added and dropped all the time. So schools will drop soccer and add lacrosse, or they'll drop wrestling and add swimming. So what you have to do is look at the net of losses and drops. And if you look at this yellow line here at the bottom, right, you can see that in Division I, the richest schools in the country, the ones with the biggest athletics programs, the biggest budgets, they are the ones that are having net losses. In Division II and Division III, net gains in terms of new men's sports. Now that doesn't make sense, does it? That the richest schools would be dropping them and the poorest schools would be adding them. And you might ask why. And the answer is that in Division I, those 300 institutions are trying to compete in an arms race. They are funneling all of their money into men's football and men's basketball. And they can't cut women's sports, right? They need money to participate in this arms race. They can't cut women's sports because they'd get sued. So what are they doing? They're cutting men's minor sports. And that's why those sports teams are being dropped. Not because of Title IX, but to fuel this juggernaut in terms of the arms race. So 78% of the total athletic budgets spent on Division I men's sports in the FBS schools, which are the biggest schools in the country, 78% of men's sports budgets are spent on 2 sports, football and basketball. Right? You can see the chunk of change that's being spent on just those 2 sports. And who's losing? Men's minor sports. And this is another, I should have pointed this out. There are only 22 programs in the United States that bring in more money than they spend. that are profit-making. There are 2,000 athletic programs in the United States. 22 are profit-making. It's a myth that all these men's sports programs or men's football and basketball are supporting women's sports. In terms of financial support, this is a quick snapshot. So women, 57%, 56% of the college population, this is what we're spending on women's sports. So when you look at athletic scholarships, right? When you look at, these are athletic participation numbers. When you look at operating expense, we're spending $1 billion more a year on men's sports than women's sports. We're spending $166 million more a year on men's sports than women's sports. Recruiting budgets, head coach salaries, assistant coach salaries, right across the board. Women aren't getting their fair shake when it comes to expenditures. When it comes to marketing and promotion, data by Mike Messner's group, longitudinal data, and we've talked about this earlier this week, we're seeing very little coverage of women's sports. And these numbers are steadfastly declining. Right now, 2009 was the last data set. Women's sports are getting 1.6% of all sports media coverage. That's like an accident, right? We may talk about this later on. It has tremendous implications in terms of the growth of women's pro sport opportunities. But this is why that women's sports is getting only 1.something% of all media coverage. Who decides who decides what gets in your local newspapers? What sports get covered? It's the sports editor that decides. It's what he is interested in. And this shows the he. Only 6% of all sports editors in the United States for newspapers are women. 6%. You don't see those numbers anywhere in any profession in the United States in terms of male versus female. College sports leadership, same picture. You're looking at 80% of all athletic directors are men. 80% of all head coaches of men's and women's teams are men. Men comprise 57% of all coaches of women's teams and 97% of all coaches of men's teams. And when you look at every single position in an athletic department, you can see the real dominance of men. And this makes a difference. These are the decision makers. They're the decision makers, and these are the highest paying jobs, the jobs with the most power, the jobs with the most status. And this has carryover into life after college sport. These are the percentages of females working in the Big Four leagues, sports marketing agencies, broadcast media, and these numbers are the same. Women are lucky if they get to the 12 to 15% range in terms of these employment opportunities. And I don't want us to forget the issue of race, because when it comes to non-white populations, especially non-white women, they're in double jeopardy. They're not getting jobs, they're not getting positions, they're not getting participation opportunities, not only because of their gender, but because of their race. And non-white men are in the same position. And just to give you a quick snapshot of that, this is kind of a deceiving number, that when you look at all of men's sports, you're looking at 67% white. The US Census says we're about 63% white. But persons of color are underrepresented in both men's and women's sports. But it's the overrepresentation of men and women of color in football and basketball that is skewing this big number. When you look at all 25 NCAA championship sports, persons of color are underrepresented in 15 of the 25 championship sports. So you're seeing the ghettoization of non-white athletes in two sports, football and basketball. Those are the highest participation numbers. When you look at college sports leadership, these numbers are worse than the women's numbers, right? So you're looking at below 20% representation of non-white men or women in these positions. When you look at the sports industry in general, this is despicable. these numbers. When have you ever seen any industry that has a non-white employment percentage in the single digits? And this carries over into sport media too. So sport media, especially the highest decision-making positions, are very underrepresented when it comes to non-white populations. So that's the thing.
Okay, Mike woke up. To follow that up, as I said, and then I want to talk a little bit about experiences of sport. What do we do to ameliorate that difficulty?
We have to start putting women in decision-making positions. Mm-hmm. It's a fact that we all hire people who we're comfortable with, people who look like us. Mm-hmm. And if the hiring authority doesn't take the initiative to hire somebody of the opposite sex, or we do not have those hiring positions open to women, then we perpetuate a white male employee workforce. And that's exactly what's happened in sport.
But as you say, we tend to hire people who are like ourselves. If the entire power structure is predominantly one way, won't it continue to hire people like itself? If that's the case, how do we break that down?
Well, in terms of, what are the solutions to it? At the college level, when it comes to coaches, for instance, it takes an athletic director who's going to say, I want to see a diverse finalist pool. Mm-hmm. If you're going to bring 3 finalist candidates to campus, let's play the Rooney Rule. Let's make sure at least one is either a non-white or a female, a member of the underrepresented sex. Mm-hmm. Making sure we have diverse faculty search committees that are going to suggest where persons of color or women are going to be recruited. Making sure that if the AD has in his back pocket an index card saying, these are the 3 guys that I'm going to hire if I lose my football coach, which every good AD has, or my basketball coach, then we have to insist on a succession list, or who am I going to recruit among a list of women, among a list of non-whites for every position in the department. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of things that college presidents can insist that ADs do, but you want the AD to take the initiative themselves, to recognize that this data is embarrassing, and it's their responsibility to do it.
Okay. I want to flip the discussion for a few minutes, and then I want to flip it back again. I want to flip it at this point to talk a little bit about personal experience, because all of you have some experience in various fields of sports and sports media, and have dealt with exactly the worlds that Donna's just talked about. And I want to begin with Donna because to extend the discussion here. What's that? No, I want to, and I don't want to put it this way, but you have the experience that goes back the farthest. So I want to start with you. As on 26 national championships in various roles, you experienced sport, women's sport before Title IX, and you have been involved in women's sport after Title IX. Tell us a little bit about the experience of sport before Title IX for women in college.
When I was growing up in the 1950s and 1960s, there were no such things as state high school championships. There were no such things as national championships for women's teams. There were no such things as athletic scholarships for women. You didn't routinely see women participating in even youth sports. The only thing I wanted to do in life when I was growing up was to be a pitcher for the New York Yankees. I was drafted number 1 in Little League when I went out for Little League baseball, which I thought was the first rite of passage for anyone who wanted to play professional baseball. And if you're drafted 1, that means you're the best player. I was lined up to get my uniform, and there in front of me was an omen that I was going to play for the New York Yankees. My hat, the hats of my team were that black navy blue. My uniform was a pinstripe uniform, standing 4th in line trying to figure out what the head size was of my baseball cap. And a very tall father came to stand next to me and turned to page 14 of the Little League rule book and read 4 words to me that would change my life forever. No girls are allowed. And this was in the 1960s. There wasn't a lawsuit opening up Little League until 1973. But that was the world for girl sports. You weren't allowed to play. And if you kind of played with the boys, you were labeled tomboy, which was a very negative term. Thank God there are a lot of kids today who have never heard it, or now it's a compliment.
Yeah.
So, but it was a very different place.
Very different place. Moving forward then, being a professional cyclist in the 2000s, the new Millennium, Rook, how did you develop in your career as a professional cyclist? First of all, when did you first decide that professional sports or sports itself was going to be a focus in your life, and why? And how did you then evolve into moving into the professional realm?
Okay, probably I can go off Donna a little bit on this. My first clothes born into this world was a pinstripe Yankee uniform, so maybe it was sort of
is there a Dodger out there for us?
Sorry. But I love sports, and I definitely benefited from being able to be the only girl on my Little League team. I struck out at T-ball, wasn't so good at that. And then also coming to college, I came to university. I graduated as an undergraduate here at USC and benefited from the Title IX scholarships that were available to me then. So I started rowing and planned on not a professional career in rowing. And then I think I just spent a little bit too much time trying to make money during the summers as a bike messenger, which made me sort of fantasize about all these grand races in Europe and things like that. So before continuing for my doctorate, I took a master's in sociology, and I thought, well, I want to take a little time off and see what I can possibly do on this bike. And so things worked out, and I head across.
Yeah. And did you, just follow up with one other comment Donna made, did you ever hear the term tomboy or other derogatory terms for being a female athlete?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's probably the story of my life. So, yeah.
What was your response? What did you hear, and what was your response to them?
I didn't really understand the negative aspects of that as a kid at first. I just sort of affirmed it, and I was always on the boys' teams, and maybe I wasn't quite aware of my own gender identity and things like this as a kid, and just felt I was one among the boys. And so I guess I also had a moment when I realized I wasn't going to get to be shortstop for the New York Yankees, and I was also told girls can't be professional baseball players, and sort of all my baseball equipment that my dad had given me was transferred to my brother. So that was sort of the reality and the crushing moment of when I realized all these other sort of things that you're told and that you dream and imagine are different.
Now, Lindsay, if you tell me you planned on being on the New York Yankees, I'm not going to believe a word you say.
I didn't.
Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, maybe. No. New York Yankees, no. First of all, before I get to the harder questions on this, let me get a little narrative from you of your background going into sports journalism. Why did you pursue that? What was your interest in it? And what did you hope to accomplish?
Well, I actually didn't play sports growing up, so it's I was not placed in sports when I was a young girl. I did dance, I did drama, things like that. And then I got to a certain point where my brother was playing a bunch of sports. My dad was his youth league coach in basketball, baseball, and I spent so much time at his practices and talking about it around the dinner table that I got to a certain age where I realized I liked his after-school activities better than I liked mine. But by then I was too competitive to be the girl that was sitting at the end of the bench in all of these sports, because there were other girls that had this head start on me. So I went at it from a totally different angle, and I was the sports editor of the yearbook, and I did everything that I could to be involved in sports in a way that didn't expose my lack of athletic talent. So I got really into it, kind of I'm the sort of person that, like, if you tell me I can't do something, then I want to do it more. And that kind of became my niche, I guess, in high school, was that I was the girl that read the sports pages and I knew what was going on, and I liked having conversations with the guys where they thought that they knew more about it than you did. They didn't expect you to know that much because you were a girl, and I liked turning that on them. So in a warped sort of way, I guess, that's sort of how I got started in it. And then when I went to college, backing up, I used to watch sports on TV, and Hannah Storm, I just remember her hosting the NBA coverage on NBC. And I remember thinking that they didn't treat her like she was any different than any of the male hosts. That they talked to her like she knew basketball, and they understood her questions. She wasn't cast. Mm-hmm. She was there because she was good at her job and she knew what she was talking about, and they treated her like that. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's what I want to do. Yeah. I want to do what I'm doing at the high school level, but on TV.
Mm-hmm. And so you went to USC, which is the right place to go, by the way.
Clearly.
And began to develop a career here, really, reporting sports as well. How did that lead you then into professional sports reporting?
Well, I started working in the sports information department with Tim Teslong, who's the SID standing in the back corner there. And then started interning at Fox Sports Net when I was a freshman, and that turned into a paid position. Just did anything that they would let me do. I was a timeout coordinator at basketball games. I was a stage manager. I was a production assistant. I did anything that they would let me do that allowed me to be around people who did what I ultimately wanted to do for a living, so that I could learn from them. Granted, the jobs that I was watching people do were different than the job that I ended up doing, because I knew with my lack of experience actually playing sports, I was not going to do play-by-play. Not that other people should not do that, I just knew that wasn't for me. I also don't enjoy talking that much without stopping. So, but just watching how the industry worked and learning everything that I could about it, learning everything that I could about the athletes and the coaches and things like that, led to a job when I was out, and then ultimately led me to NFL Network, where I work now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I warned you I was going to go here, so you can't say I didn't warn you. Jane Kennedy and Phyllis George and Allison Gordon, among others, were seen as pioneers in sports journalism as women. And as Donna Lopiano's PowerPoint indicated, the number of women in sports broadcasting and in sports journalism remains in the single digits. Which means at this point in 10 years, or 20 years, you're gonna go on forever. 40
Obviously.
years, 45 years, yeah. In 45 years, Lindsay Rhodes is going to be looked at potentially as a pioneer because there were so few other women in the business. What's your perspective on the ratio of women to men in sports broadcasting? And I presume you've never thought of yourself as a pioneer, or I may be wrong.
No.
You may have, no. Given that, how do you look at this disparity in numbers and respond to it as a professional in that world?
Well, at this point, I don't look at the disparity of numbers. I look at my primary problem with my industry and my gender is that I think that a lot of women that have jobs are cast. And my problem with that is that you don't cast the males. They go up through the proper channels, and a lot of times it's we need a female. And where do I find a female, as opposed to
where do I find the best?
I mean, there are tons of men, and they hire someone that's been working in a major market if you're at the network level, or a medium market if you're a major market, or a small market if you're a medium market. And I see a lot of times a lack of experience in the women that are hired to do the jobs that I do. I think that the difference in my generation of women in sports broadcasting is that I think that there's less of a responsibility. The people that came before us have already knocked down all sorts of doors so that the producers feel like they do want a woman on the broadcast. And it's now our responsibility to take that to the next level and not just say, okay, I'm here, but I'm here and you should listen to my voice in a different way than you have in the past. I'm not just confined to the sideline to do a 30-second story about someone's past, or to ask a question to a coach that doesn't want to answer the question as they're walking off the field. We're seeing a lot more job opportunities for people with the proliferation of cable networks. There's a lot more programming, and so there are a lot more opportunities for women to do shows where you actually get a chance to talk and you get a chance to host. And it's one of the things I love with my job on NFL Network, is that I get a chance to actually sit and have conversations. And the more that you have an opportunity to do that, people understand that you can actually have the conversation. And now we can go to the next level. And if I can drive the conversation as opposed to just being a part of it, then we can change things a little bit. Like you're talking about women being in a position of power. One of the good things that I saw there, and I know the numbers aren't where we want them to be, but the fact that the numbers are greater puts more women in the mix. So even if there aren't professional sporting opportunities for them to be professional athletes, there will be there are so many more women that just grew up playing sports now that want to be involved in sports industries in some way, shape, or form. And so you have more female beat writers, you have more females that are in sports PR, you have more females that are in sports production. I work with a lot of women, and I'm surrounded by a lot of women doing what I do. Certainly still a minority, but I'm by no means the only woman in the office ever, or in a locker room.
Follow-up question to that then, you say you have an interest in guiding conversation. What then would be your goal, your next step or set of steps in the sports business?
For myself?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have a next step for myself professionally. I really enjoy what I do now, and I don't want to look past that. I enjoy my job at the moment, and I'm not content, but I'm content to kind of take this until I feel like there isn't a challenge there for me anymore. And there's a challenge daily just to, fight small battles. Let's not have that conversation. That conversation's demeaning to the audience. Let's go, to another level. And so I'm enjoying that right now.
I wonder if I can just comment on that. You had mentioned to start with that Hannah Storm was your role model. Role models are absolutely crucial in changing this paradigm. And where this all falls apart in terms of women really progressing in the system is women get pigeonholed, as you said, into an entry level or one visible position, and you get typecast into something. And you only see that role model. For the system to get fixed, you have to have a whatever the underrepresented minority is, at every single level, higher management, middle management, lower management, play-by-play, whatever, so that you begin to pull up people in the system. That you get to push people who are just like you and your role model just like you.
And it can happen accidentally at first. Yeah. Because my problem with people being cast, okay, so if you hired me for the wrong reasons, fine. But I am going to take advantage of the fact that I'm there, and I'm there for the right reasons. And I'm gonna make you see me differently by the end of my tenure here. And so that then I feel like my responsibility now is to the people that are coming up next, is so that they don't have to even be thought of that way. If they don't come to the table with something of substance, then don't come to the table at all. There will be women out there who have the substance and who have the whole package. But yeah, I'm conscious that I work in a visual medium. It's just, it's what it is. And so, but I'm aware of that if you hired me for the wrong reasons, I'm still going to drive the meeting, the production meeting. You're gonna have to listen to me. I have ideas that I believe in. I think that I should be taken as seriously as my male counterpart. And frankly, I was talking here to Jeff before we got up here, and I have a co-host on the show that I do. I have a male co-host, and then there's me. And one of the things that I was afraid of a little bit when I first got this job on Total Access, which is our show of record, kind of our nightly newscast, if you will, on NFL Network, was that he would be like the host, and I would be the co-host. And I would get kind of some stuff here and there, and we would look like we were equal at the start of the show, but that I wouldn't get to handle as much of the content as he did. And it's been incredibly even. And I'm proud to say that I think if you turned on the show, you would get the same sense that I got watching Hannah Storm. but I'm very conscious of that. I'm not going to be put in that position. I'm going to make sure that, you know, we're having some of the serious conversations when I'm on the air too, and that I don't just do a fluffy, feature-y type interview.
One of the criticisms that's often leveled at sports media is the lack of something you're not interested in, but I'd like your comments on the lack of women who are play-by-play broadcasters or color commentators. Often color commentators at one point or another played the game, but play-by-play broadcasting is really a skill you learn as a broadcaster. What is what's your perspective on that? And again, how do we go about establishing more women in the role of play-by-play broadcaster?
Well, I think her point was great about the Rooney Rule, that there has to be some sort of, you're not going to establish a Rooney Rule in terms of getting people play-by-play experience, but the more that those numbers go up that you showed there, the more that women are playing basketball, for instance. They're going to have this deep embedded love and knowledge of basketball, and they're going to feel comfortable. It's a comfort thing. You're not going to go and try and do a job if you don't feel comfortable with your knowledge level about it. So if you've come up playing basketball and you know that you know as much about basketball as the guy that's sitting next to you, when you are trying to make a career decision, you're not going to just defer that he's going to be the play-by-play guy and you're going to be the sideline reporter. You're going to maybe try and go down that path when you're in college and you're in a college broadcasting department. And you know, why wouldn't I don't know why a woman that hadn't played basketball her entire life wouldn't go out for that job. And so I think it's just inevitable that that's going to happen.
But, well, look at the number of women who are playing basketball. Who do you know besides Nancy Lieberman Klein and Cheryl Miller, right? Who've done a men's game. And Myers, 3, good. Keep going.
Doris Burke.
Yeah, probably on one hand, compared to the number of women who are out there qualified to do it and would want to do it.
But you're also looking at a high level. You're looking at national broadcasters that we would know who they were, and you're looking at people that have gotten to a point in their career where they have enough experience to just be talented enough to do play-by-play on a national level. That takes you to a certain age. You know, you're not going to be anywhere near remotely ready to do that if you're 25 years old. So that's where those numbers going up and up, you're going to start seeing it more, I think. Because you're talking about an age group. You're talking about an age group that was around pre-Title IX.
But we're talking about Cheryl and Nancy being in their 50s now, right? 40s or 50s? There is no movement for women to break into play-by-play in men's sports. None.
But don't you think that the more that women grow up, or girls grow up playing sports, and sports are an interest level of theirs, when they get to college, they're not going to feel, it'll be foreign for them to feel like they should step aside and just defer all of those types of jobs to their male counterparts. I don't even understand how, if somebody hasn't been taught growing up that they can't do something, why it would suddenly become apparent to them that they shouldn't do it. I agree with you about the role models, but at least there are some out there for this new generation of girls that are growing up with this heightened interest in sports to know that there are outlets for them in the industries.
Everything you say is rational, absolutely rational. It absolutely makes sense, but it doesn't point to what the barriers really are to women breaking into the business. It's just not happening.
And what are the barriers?
It's discrimination. It really is.
I want to jump in here and add a little bit. Is like in professional cycling, they have a women's race that follows, or actually you finish the race before the men's does. And so the men's race is Milan-San Remo, it's in Italy, and the women's race follows the same course, but of course a little bit shorter, as we talked about in some other presentations earlier this week. And even though the TV crew and the infrastructures are all set up and all there, they actually cut off the cameras and have sort of of a free time with kids and sort of carnival type festival as the women come through the finish line, so that there's no coverage and sort of no shifting attention on that. And that's from my perspective as an athlete. Later on, going back into the field in a research perspective within these different sports organizations or looking at the owners of these races, I spoke with a lot of lawyers, and on the sort of representation and the leadership within these lawyers of our sports institutions that are charged with making these opportunities for both men and women really time and again were male dominated and really recited the typical reasons of resources and all these other aspects. And it's one thing to miss out on a little limelight, but what does that trickle down into or up to in terms of the resources? And I saw a correlation between the resources in protecting the athletes' rights, that the lawyers, just in terms of the organizations dedicating those lawyers to women's causes, their pension issues or being paid and stuff, actually quite discrepancies. And so it's a media issue at so many different levels as we're talking about, but then how does this sync up with actually the industry and with the sports governing bodies that are charged with trying to keep sports fair on all levels?
Which may be the real complication here, because I bring the entry point of one issue, why aren't more women in blank? And there's this complex of discriminatory practices that go all the way up and down the sports world that don't necessarily directly impact a single job, but they indirectly impact because it hits on so many different levels. Am I more or less getting that right?
Lindsay, did you have a male mentor? Or did you have a
Not
female
one
mentor?
specific. I've never had a specific mentor that I would point to.
Did you ever have a female mentor?
Not particularly. I mean, there have been people in the industries that I've looked to, but no.
Well, one of the interesting things is when you look at the advancement of men within any industry, they not only have mentors, they have sponsors. There's somebody, usually a guy, in their case, who's going to stake their reputation, who's going to stake their job on this guy getting a job. It's not just, I'm going to teach you about this. It's, I'm going to get you your next job. And he calls his buddy and says, this is the person. And if you don't hire this person, there's a loss of something here between those two people. That is what is not happening for women. So, for example, when a college president calls the commissioner of the Big 10 conference or the Big 12 and says, who shall I hire as my athletic director? That commissioner is not mentioning a woman. And they're staking their reputation on a male. And if you talk to the commissioner, he says, well, I mentor women. You know, I mentor a lot of women, but he never sponsors women. And that's the missing piece of the puzzle now. We're not getting males in power positions, because women aren't there, to sponsor women. Mm-hmm. They don't see that as a responsibility. They're not out to change the paradigm.
Put themselves on the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, you're going to find this hard to believe. But we actually need to open it up to questions from the audience because we've run to our hour limit. I know it seems like we've been up here like 7 minutes. The reason for that is this worked out the way that I like it to work out, which is I asked 3 or 4 questions to try to irritate people, and you guys were great. So we need to open up the floor to some questions from the folks out there. One rule, well, 2 rules. Number 1, if you're going to ask a question, you're going to have to stand up. So if you don't like standing up in public, well, and number 2, you're going to have to stand up, number 1, so they can catch you on the camera. Number 2, you're going to have to say it very loud, and I may have to repeat it just so that we get it on our recording. But anybody have any questions for anyone on our? Yes. You have to stand up. There you go.
This question's actually for Lindsay. How much authority do you have in actually deciding the questions you're going to ask the athletes, or are they kind of already set for you guys? Because it seems like a lot of them are pretty generic, that's a little bit simple.
Right. Yes. So that's actually the model I find every day. It has to do with topics. I write every word that comes out of my mouth. I mean, if there's writing, I don't read other people's stuff. I'm a control freak like that. If I'm going to say something and it's stupid, I'd rather it be because I'm stupid and not because somebody else is. But in terms of topics, actually the battle that I fight more than I would say most people that I work with. The producers typically will come in with a topic or topics, and they're up for debate, but a lot of times you have to fight against having the same conversation day in and day out. From a TV standpoint, a lot of it has to do with what moves the needle, what they think moves the needle. And so then it becomes a chicken and the egg sort of thing, which I think actually comes back to this whole gender issue. In my industry, Tim Tebow last year, how many of you were sick of that? Right? I mean, because I was, and so it's like, I mean, we would be in every meeting, and they'd be like, we'd open up the rundown, and it'd be like, seriously, Tim Tebow again? Like, I hate him now, and he's a really likable guy. I'm just sick of talking about Tim Tebow. But so you do have to fight to get away from the low-hanging fruit, and try and raise the level of discourse. And I think from a gender standpoint, it's interesting. The chicken and the egg thing. I've always wondered about how much control we had. Producers, editors, they'll all blame a lack of interest. That people are interested in the NFL and the NBA and stuff like that, and that's why a lot of the women's sports are on the back page. One of my first jobs in this industry was in Santa Barbara, which granted is a small market, and so you're talking about a small town where you have small town pride, and so it's sort of a different story than raising interest nationally. But the women's basketball team at Santa Barbara was by far and away more popular than the men's basketball team. It was the front page of the newspaper every day. It was the lead of my sportscast every day. If the women and the men were playing, we would lead with the women. And I think it's a front runner thing, and again, it's a small town thing. They're good, and they're good at a national level, so we're going to point to that because we're proud of that. The guys are okay, but on a national level, not so much. So we're going to really embrace the women. And I always wondered why that wouldn't work on a larger scale. Why? And at the Olympics, it does. Come time for the Olympics, you hear about the women's stories as much as you do about the men. I wonder if
there is no assessment of interest to determine what gets on television, right? When they point to ratings, well, somehow men get higher ratings than women, but ratings are not a function of interest. They're a function of three things. Do you put them on in prime time, right, when the largest number of people are watching? Do you put them on in a predictable time and place so I can remember when they're on? Monday Night Football, Thursday Night Football, any of those easy to remember things. And the third reason is, are you promoting it? So what has happened with this whole men's sport paradigm is you have the big six sports garnering huge rights fees that are in excess of their value. So in order to recoup their value, what do all these television stations have to do? They have to put them on at prime time, same place, and they have to use all available free time to promote what they've paid big money to, and there's no money left for anybody else. There's no money left for developing men's sports. In fact, they've even gone so far as to develop their own owned properties leading up to NFL, following NFL, to try to recoup this overpaid rights fees. And that's why LPGA, that's why WTA are going to Europe now to get rights fees, or to Asia to get rights fees, because there is no domestic money in the United States going to either women's sports or to men's minor sports, just because of the glut for the big six.
Yeah, and I think that gets back to Lindsay's point about the chicken and the egg. If you construct this as the important sport and sell it as the important sport, then the ratings say it's the important sport because you've constructed it as the important sport. Absolutely. So you go back and say, well, the ratings go for this sport, and it becomes literally
self-perpetuating.
Yeah,
it's absolutely self-perpetuating.
And am I right? Is that the chicken and the egg analogy essentially? So so you run into that problem because it just is a self-repeating monster in that sense, and it's very difficult to break out of that because you have to keep paying the fees. And again, it's like NBC with the Olympics; they have to keep paying more and more ridiculous fees because they've said this is the one demarker of NBC. So they will keep stepping out beyond what anybody else will say.
But look at the Olympic Games, right? You look at the Olympics; it's a 60% female audience. You look at what happens when a television station wants to sell women's event. What did ESPN do with the Women's World Cup this past year? It promoted it, it put it at prime time, it sold it, and it got ratings.
Yeah.
So it has to want to do it. And the men's sport establishment doesn't want to do it.
It's the real challenge. More questions? Yes.
This is for Lindsay. I was wondering, like, what would you say was the hardest thing that when you started working as a sports? What was the first thing that
I mean, there are a lot of different directions that you could go in with that. Just in terms of being willing to, my industry is such that you have to be willing to do whatever it takes to get in the door. Getting in the door is the hardest part, frankly. And so it's a matter of being willing to give up everything that you have here and move wherever someone will offer you a job. It's just a getting in the door thing. So I talk to interns a lot, people who ask that question, and I tell them, you need to, whoever offers you a job, whoever will allow you to go do this job and get reps, because it's just like a sport, it's just like anything. You don't get better unless you do it a lot, and you don't get any practice doing what I do unless someone will let you actually be on TV and do it on a nightly basis. And so you have to go be willing to work in an incredibly small market and leave everything behind and have no life for however long that takes, and be awful and be prepared to be awful. And I tell people the smaller the market is actually, that's the better job, because if you start off in a big market and you will be awful, people will just think that you're awful. They don't know the difference between a lack of potential and a lack of experience. So you have to go somewhere where you can go ahead and be bad and have nobody see it, and then get better, and then let them see you. So that's that aspect of it. Since we're here talking about gender issues today, as a female in my business, there have been a number of things that are tough, just in terms of, I feel like it's like anything, you have to prove yourself over and over and over and over and over again in order for them to take you seriously, to just take you as seriously as you know, maybe the guy who's also the sports anchor there, my first job, I found myself tested a lot. It's like, people are like, oh, you're really into sports? Or is it just a job? And I'm like, seriously? Like, I would just go into sports broadcasting if I wasn't a sports fan? It's a bizarre question that you wouldn't ask a guy. Yep. And so then I get quizzed. And so you have to answer a couple questions at parties to prove that you're an actual sports fan, which I don't do anymore. But you know what I mean? That kind of stuff's bizarre, that your coworkers kind of test you a little bit to see if they can actually take you seriously. And then you prove that they can, and that you're better than them. Yeah. But one of the things that I still deal with from a gender standpoint is, as a journalist, dealing with the whole building contacts and relationships. And I know a lot of people in my business have really mastered this. Like I said, there are female beat writers across this country. Every team that I go visit, I see a female face in the media room. I haven't figured out quite how to build the contacts and build the relationships from a reporting standpoint that a lot of my male colleagues have, because I don't want to send the wrong message. I don't want to get in a weird situation. And there's the whole male-female dynamic, and that might just be a me thing, but I've found that that's a harder thing to overcome. That I wish that there were more women that I could talk to that do what I do, that I could say, how do you handle this? Because I don't feel as comfortable texting a player, in the middle of the night asking him about his contract status, just because I don't want to invite any kind of weird back and forth. So there are weird things that you don't even think of when you get started, that you run into these hurdles that have to be figured out.
Many of the challenges. Yeah, to reinforce your first point, I've had David Hill here, the CEO of Fox Sports, talk to students several times, and he will say exactly that about if you want a job in this industry, he'll say, move to South Dakota. Number one, you'll get work to be able to be on television. You need to do it over and over again because you're going to be awful when you start. And number two, and of course I'm not going to say this anywhere near as bombastically as David does, nor with the language that he does, but he says every time you say the F word in South Dakota, nobody's going to hear you. So you can get away with every mistake that you could possibly make.
YouTube and Twitter.
Yeah, I know. So
and
that's
all
that's
sorts of
changed.
fun
The
stuff.
game's changed. Oh, which brings us back to the Twitter question, and this is a particular issue. Yeah, you bring this up as part of this, but this is really a significant issue in this. If you tweet someone or if you text someone, that's public property, as Tiger Woods and others have shown. That is now public property, public communication. So you really have challenges in terms of communicating with athletes, especially since, again, virtually all major sports are male sports. It creates another set of barriers for you in terms of being able to communicate with potential people that you would potentially interview. Are there ways to get around that, or is this just the nature of the beast in the business?
I'm not sure.
So you mentioned, you don't want to get into, say, texting a male athlete and get
Right.
into a weird conversation or have the thing look wrong. But by the same token, as I said, texting is public communication. That male athlete could publicize that at the drop of a hat. Given that situation, that does put barriers up to you communicating with a male athlete that may not exist there for male sports broadcasters. How do you work around that? Or is there a way to work around that? Is that just the nature of the beast today?
I feel like, like I said, I haven't completely figured it out, frankly. I'm feeling a little bit more liberated in the last few years because I feel like I've done this long enough that if you don't know that I'm there for the right reasons by now, and that I'm not there to be your eye candy, or that if you still think whatever you're going to think of me as a female in this business, then that's on you. I feel like I've created enough of a resume that I feel a little bit more comfortable just sort of letting my guard down a little bit. But I'm always conscious of the fact that things can be taken misconstrued, and that I have a responsibility to appear, not to appear serious, but to constantly be taken seriously. And so, I'm definitely on guard to giving any kind of reason for people not to take me seriously for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. Always a challenge, and even more of a challenge with the dynamics of social media, which is, we had an illustration Jeff was involved in a couple of weeks ago, a program that we had here. Landon Donovan talked about wanting to get back into playing soccer, and a couple of students tweeted it, and I'm getting emails and phone calls from all sorts of sports media trying to figure out if this really happened. Did he really say this? Did this really happen at USC? Can we get video of this? And it's almost instantaneous that a rumor gets online and becomes the full-fledged truth, and it complicates the issue considerably again.
Yeah, the world has changed.
Yeah, and it hasn't changed. It's still changing, boy. It's changing really fast. One more, yeah.
Okay, question. You guys talked a little bit about chicken and egg, but I found that the only time I'm really interested in watching female sports is the Olympics, which we learned in other presentations that it's like one of the only events that is equally watched by women, and that receives about fair coverage. So would you say that equal media coverage really equates to interest in women, or if there's like a relationship between those?
We know that 45 to 55% of the in-arena and television viewing audience of men's sports is female, that females and males both watch and like women's sports. We know from the 60% female viewership of the Olympic Games that if you put women's sports up there, men and women will watch. So explain to me what your explanation is that you wouldn't want to see some more figure skating or some more beach volleyball or non-Olympic. Why would you think the audience would disappear if you put that on television? Like, I'm not sure I understand your question even.
Well, I was just wondering because, I'm just thinking maybe the only reason that I find the Olympics interesting is because that's the only thing that I see with women's sports. So maybe the reason why, there would be more interest if
if Misty May and a gold medal volleyball team, which you watched during the Olympics, were on the next week, would you watch them again? Why wouldn't you? But they're not there. They're not there unless it's an Olympic Games.
This also goes back structurally as well, doesn't it? Because it's not, they are there because of the Olympics, but then there's no follow-up structure for it. There's beach volleyball is being played all the time, and the AVP is trying to reconstruct its product to sell it. But it is sporadic, and there is no real structure to it that makes sense. That may be a little rough on the beach volleyball. People are going to hate me for that. But the AVP has its own unique problems. But it needs really, I think, from a structural level, from the rules makers who are creating the sport itself before you even get to media, the rules makers who are creating sport itself, to create a structural format for competition outside of the Olympics that can be broadcast in some way, so you have a narrative.
Every sport has this structure. We're talking about what gets on television.
Well, in terms of this is one of the problems with boxing. In terms of competitiveness, boxing has fallen apart in terms of viewership over the last few years. And one of the reasons for it is you have 1,000 different belts, which means belts don't really mean much of anything. So you get one small subset of boxing that gets pretty significant viewership, not what it did, but pretty significant viewership on pay-per-view. But even the pay-per-view is diminishing in audience for boxing. And part of it is because they don't have a structure that makes any sense to the way in which boxing rolls out anymore. And the UFC has taken over the position of having that kind of structure. And so UFC is much more broadly shown on television, much more popular. Well, it's growing in popularity. That's an overstatement. But the sports makers, and I'll take beach volleyball for instance because it is in such a dire straits, in terms of constructing a narrative for beach volleyball, you have to create a narrative that says, okay, here's where the top players are, here's how you get to be a top player, and here's how you play for a championship in order to create the kind of sports narrative that you can place on television, on media. So it seems to me it's not just a breakdown in media, but a breakdown all the way to to many of the leagues outside of college sports where the disparity clearly is.
Who makes the construction for men's sports? Dick Ebersol sits down with the head of the league and says, this is what I want on television, and I want this structured this way. If Ebersol doesn't say that to women's sports or doesn't offer the structure for women's sports, would you blame the victim? It's somehow you haven't produced the structure? There's no incentive, there's no deal between women's sports and the distributor of women's sports to make the structure you're suggesting right now.
Yeah.
And there is that deal between Dick and men's sports.
Yeah. I'm not trying to blame the victim. I look at all these people as people who are trying to make money. So everybody's involved in a position of taking athletes and putting them in a situation where not the athletes but the people in power are going to make money. And it seems to me that there's failure all the way along the line, media and ownership of leagues and the conversation between both.
Yeah, this is a real challenge for international federations, whether it's maybe not so much FIFA, but whether it's volleyball or cycling and a lot of the so-called lesser sports. And the language that the leadership in these institutions uses when addressing this problem is, well, the concern is about not being legible enough and not having your sport globalized enough. So to stave off rival leagues and breakaway leagues, there's an increasing momentum and effort and attention and resources, of course, dedicated to this. And the third element to the legibility and to whether or not an assessment of how global your sport is it being participated globally? So in that count, you could look at both female and male or gendered participation or not. But the third element is a little bit more of a political economy look and looking at where does the sport actually have what they call as ownership of time. So can they get either broadcast slots on a given weekly or daily schedule, but actually looking at the overall annual calendar. So for instance, the Tour de France kind of has a monopoly on July. So when and where and how can these sports, one, make a sport that's legible, that has rules on a very in the field level that makes sense, and then over time for getting your belts or these different things that you've talked about, so that we can follow them in times that aren't just the Olympic times. And I think that's a special dilemma, and I did not hear within the different international federations each of these three agenda and answering it on a gender basis of how are we going to ensure that this is good for volleyball for men's and women's, even though volleyball really has a great strategic hand in that, I think more so than some other international federations right now with the popularity of beach volleyball, and as we heard this week, it becoming a varsity sport here at USC. But for other sports, this becomes increasingly another element in a way, like you suggested, that the institutions bear a responsibility, not just the media outside of that.
Yeah. Boy, you opened up an incredibly complicated conversation point right at the moment where we're supposed to stop. Oh man, hurts when that happens. But I have to follow the rules as it always goes. We have some excellent folks, as you can tell, really smart folks up here on the dais with us, and I want to thank them in just a moment. But before we close, a couple of things. Number one, there should be some refreshments up in the lobby as you exit from here. So we invite you all to stop there and grab some cookies, coffee, and whatever else they've loaded up there. And in the short term, we're not leaving yet. A couple of things. This fall, we have scheduled the USC Conference on Sports, LGBT issues in sports, which will be roughly around October. We don't have an absolute date set, but we're working on that. And that should be a very interesting conference on some important and interesting issues involving sports. But before we finish, I want to thank, in particular, Donna Lopiano, Campbell, wow, sorry, Campbell, and Lindsay Rhodes for great conversation. And I am sure everything here will spark further conversation for you with them, so grab them on the way out or up in the lobby and ask them what you will. Thank you very much, and we will see you in the fall.